Hi everybody! Today we're going to do an activity from our Texas History Trunks here at Bush Square Museums, making butter. It's going to be fairly simple, but a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and get started. Technically, all the materials that we're going to need for this activity are right in front of me. You can see that it's not a whole lot. I have some heavy whipping cream that I got from the grocery store. A fairly small container. You can use a baby food jar, or I'm using this little plastic container with a tight lid. You want somewhere to store your butter when you're finished with it, so I'm going to use this glass jar. And then we have a piece of cheesecloth. And the reason we have this cheesecloth is you can see it has a lot of little fine mesh. And so we're going to use the cheesecloth to strain the extra buttermilk, which you guys will see in just a minute here when we get started. I've always wondered how pioneers in early Texas would go out and gather milk from a cow and somehow end up with this. It turns out it's not that complicated, but it is going to take a little bit of work. The first step that they would take, of course, would be to go out and gather the milk from the cow. Once they had the milk, they would set it aside until the heavy cream started to separate from the cow's milk. Then you had cow's milk to drink, and you had this heavy cream. At that point, what to do with the cream? Well, turns out you would bring the cream and you would add it to a butter churn, a lot like this little guy I have in front of me. This is a smaller tabletop version. It's wooden. Probably a lot smaller than you would have used to make a big batch, but for our demonstration purposes, this is going to work just fine. The process of bringing in the heavy cream and adding it to the churn was not complicated at all. They would bring the cream in. They would remove this little guy called the dasher, add the cream into the churn, and then replace the dasher and put the lid back on. And then they would spend quite some time actually using the dasher to dash the heavy cream. This chore would take quite some time, and often a younger child in the family would be responsible for this as mom and dad were busy with other chores. And so we're not going to actually use a butter churn because we don't need a big batch of butter. But we're going to take a look at how you can make your very own batch of butter at home. We already discussed that I'm not a member of a pioneer family and I don't have my own cow. But I was able to go to my local grocery store and I found this heavy whipping cream, which is actually the only thing that you're going to need to make the butter. It's really better if you let the heavy whipping cream sit out for a while so that it's room temperature. This certainly doesn't work as well if the cream is really cold. Our cream's been sitting out for a little while, so I'm going to go ahead and add it to my container. I'm going to leave a little bit of room in the container so that I can shake it. And then I'm going to put that lid back on. And I'm going to make sure that it's really tight. Once I'm sure that that lid is on there, then this is where the heavy work is going to start, and I have a lot of shaking ahead of me. And so I'm going to start shaking this heavy cream, and shaking, and shaking. I've been shaking this butter now for about 15 minutes or so. So let's go ahead and open it up and see how we did. We're going to go ahead and use the cheesecloth that we have here. I'm going to put it pretty tightly over the top of that container, And then we're gonna strain the buttermilk right off of the butter. Now, of course, even buttermilk, a lot of people still like just to drink buttermilk. It's delicious. Or you can use it for baking. So we're gonna save this buttermilk for another use. And meantime, we have some really nice looking butter. Just for now, I'm going to go ahead and put this butter into our glass container. And you can see it looks really, really great. Usually at this time you would take maybe some salt and add it in for a little bit of flavoring or any other kind of herbs and spices. I think probably for me, I'm just gonna add a little bit of salt and then we'll call it quits. One more thing to think about is that there's a pretty big difference between the clump of butter that I have in here and our beautiful stick of butter that we have here. And so one of the ways that pioneer families might spice it up a little bit, make their butter a little bit more beautiful, is that they might have a mold. They could turn the butter into pretty shapes. Some of the molds were really, really fancy, like maybe a leaf or any kind of an animal. Some of them were a lot more simple. This is an example of a really simple mold. And so you can see it has two pieces, a little box and then a press. And so what they would do is add the clump of butter into this press and then press it down. And then when they would remove the press, they would have a nice square shape, like so. Since I decided all I want to add to my butter is salt, I have this fancy, fancy sea salt. I'm going to add a little bit to my butter. And there you have it. We have some nice butter with a little dash of sea salt. And I'm gonna try it out for dinner tonight and see if it's delicious. I hope you guys had fun making butter with me, and I hope you decide to join us for our next Texas Trunk History lesson.